The other morning, I was scrolling through one of those rise and grind feeds. You know the look. Perfect sunrise yoga. A smoothie that looked almost aggressively healthy. Someone who had apparently already coded a new app before 9 a.m.
Oh, I know those feeds. They can be aspirational, but also a bit much.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And instantly, I got that familiar pang of comparison, that feeling that I just wasn't doing enough. So I decided I needed to be productive. Right now.
The pressure kicks in.
Totally. So I opened my emails, I opened Twitter, I put on a podcast, all at the same time. I felt like I was finally in the zone, really juggling it all, crushing the day.
Uh-huh. The classic multitasking attempt.
And this attempt at hyper-efficiency culminated spectacularly with my elbow sending a lukewarm, very green smoothie all over my laptop. It was sticky.
Oh no, laptop game.
It survived, thankfully.
Yeah.
But in that moment, wiping kale sludge off the keyboard, it just hit me. I wasn't actually being productive. I was just performing productivity.
That's a really insightful way to put it. Performing productivity.
All that frantic switching back and forth, it wasn't efficient. It was just messy. And it made me wonder, is this whole obsession with doing everything at once actually just making us worse at all of it?
Well, that smoothie catastrophe, though unfortunate, perfectly validates a core concept in cognitive science. What you experienced wasn't genuine simultaneous action. Multitasking, as most of us practice it, is fundamentally an illusion.
An illusion. So my brain wasn't really doing all those things together.
No, not really. Your brain wasn't performing all those tasks at once. It was rapidly, frantically switching between them.
So my feeling of being a masterful juggler was actually just my brain kind of running out of gas.
Precisely. We need to introduce the concept of task switching cost. Every single time your brain switches gears, even if the transition feels instantaneous, say, the millisecond it takes you to register a Slack notification and pull your focus away from an Excel sheet, there is a measurable cognitive price.
A price, like it takes effort.
A significant effort. Think of it like constantly driving a manual car, shifting gears every 5 seconds. You consume excess mental fuel, you burn time in the transition, and critically, you introduce friction that leads directly to errors and delays. We sacrifice efficiency in the name of speed.
That friction is exactly what caused the mess, the spilled smoothie. And that messy, sticky feeling, the sense that I wasn't fully present in any one thing, that's the core problem we're investigating today, isn't it?
It is. That lingering, messy feeling has a precise scientific definition. Attention residue. Psychologist Sophie Leroy defined this phenomenon as the unresolved thoughts, goals, and fragments of the previous task that literally occupy space in your working memory.
They hang around.
They hang around, actively interfering with your ability to commit fully to the task you're supposed to be doing now. A piece of your cognitive horsepower is stuck looking backward.
Okay, let's unpack attention residue, or AR, because it sounds like the single biggest enemy of modern productivity. If I stop responding to an email halfway through to jump onto a phone call, the thoughts about how I was going to word that difficult final paragraph, that's the residue.
That is exactly it. AR occurs specifically under 3 conditions: when you are involuntarily interrupted.
Like the phone call.
Right, or when you fail to finish a task, maybe you just walk away from it. Or even when you feel intense, unresolved time pressure around that task. Because the task isn't truly closed off in your mind, your brain struggles to let go.
It just keeps chewing on it.
Exactly. It keeps those threads active in the background, consuming processing power even while you were attempting to engage with the new task.
And if those lingering thoughts are eating up my mental capacity, that means my ability to handle the current task is fundamentally degraded before I even begin.
It's severely impacted, yes, because AR directly impairs your working memory capacity. Working memory is often described as your brain's short-term processing RAM. It's the narrow space where you hold and manipulate immediate information.
Like the mental countertop where I do my thinking.
That's a good way to think of it. Now imagine trying to pour water through a funnel, but the funnel's neck is already clogged with yesterday's mental debris, those leftover task fragments.
I love that analogy. If my RAM, my countertop, is cluttered with bits of the half-written email or the meeting I just exited, I can't process new information efficiently.
Exactly. You degrade your ability to compute, prioritize new incoming signals, and decide what information to absorb or ignore. This explains why, when you are feeling overloaded, you might struggle to recall a simple name or a specific detail relevant to the task right in front of you.
The bandwidth just isn't there.
The bandwidth simply isn't there.
And this clogged funnel, this cluttered countertop, it's the absolute antithesis of what we strive for in creative or complex work, right? That deep focus state.
Absolutely. Attention residue is the direct opponent of what we call deep work. That flow state that demands extended periods of high concentration on a single, cognitively demanding task, free from distraction. If AR is constantly present, if you are never truly ending one task before starting the next, reaching that deep focused state is functionally impossible.
You're always operating in the cognitive shallows.
Exactly, just splashing around, never really diving deep.
Okay, that brings us to the scale of the physiological drain this constant switching creates. We're not just talking about the occasional sticky note on our brain. This is, well, it sounds like an epidemic of interruption.
It is perpetual. Research has estimated that the average knowledge worker is interrupted on average every 11 minutes.
Every 11 minutes. Wow, that means before the cognitive cost of the last interruption has even been fully paid down, the next one arrives. The effects of attention residue are literally felt every waking hour of the workday.
Correct. And by constantly forcing ourselves to ignore this residue and jump to the next thing, we are engaging in what is called always-on behavior.
Always on. I hear that phrase everywhere.
And this perpetual fragmentation isn't just a mental habit. It forces our system into a chronic, low-level state of alertness. And this moves beyond psychology into physiology. This constant state results in the chronic production of stress hormones, primarily adrenaline and cortisol.
So we're not just feeling stressed, like mentally overwhelmed. Our bodies are biologically hyper-alert, constantly scanning the environment for the next stimulus, the next buzz, the next red dot, the next demand.
That's right. And that chronic cortisol bath is highly damaging, particularly to the prefrontal cortex. That's the region of the brain responsible for executive functions planning, decision-making, self-control.
The CEO of the brain.
Kind of, yeah. And when the prefrontal cortex is constantly bathed in stress hormones, its effectiveness erodes. You become less good at governing yourself and more prone to distraction and impulsive reaction. Sustained concentration becomes an uphill battle because your brain is wired to constantly prioritize novelty and perceived threats.
Okay, if that's the effect on our ability to govern ourselves, what does it do to our core cognitive abilities, like memory and intelligence? Is there a measurable hit?
Oh, the measurable costs are stark. Studies show that frequent media multitaskers perform measurably worse on tests of working memory. They also struggle significantly with long-term retention.
Why retention specifically?
It seems that constant switching makes it harder for the hippocampus, a crucial area in the brain responsible for encoding new memories, to properly process and store information. It's like it never gets a clean signal to work with.
That makes perfect sense. It's like a receptionist trying to process incoming mail while the phones are ringing nonstop. The mail gets mixed up, forgotten, or simply thrown in the wrong pile.
That's a perfect analogy. And we have to highlight that quite shocking finding from the University of London. They suggested that constant attention switching could temporarily drop IQ scores by 10 to 15 points, particularly noted in men in that study.
Wait, let me just pause and absorb that. My brain, for all intents and purposes, is functioning as if I pulled an all-nighter just by switching tabs and checking Slack all day. That's a terrifying level of self-imposed inefficiency.
It is a brutal reality check.
Yeah.
Multitasking doesn't make you smarter or more capable. It makes you temporarily less effective than if you were rested and focused.
Okay. Let's pivot from individual tasks to organizational structures, because often we don't choose to switch, we're forced to. What happens when we're forced to juggle different hats and roles entirely, which is so common in the modern workplace?
This is where attention residue gets baked into the professional structure itself. We need to look at the context of multiple team membership, or MTM. Research indicates that somewhere between 65% and even up to 95% of knowledge workers are now assigned to 2 or more teams simultaneously.
Wow, almost everyone.
Pretty much. And this forces constant micro-role transitions throughout the day.
So in the same hour, I might be a senior strategist for Project Alpha, maybe doing deep thinking. Then I had to immediately transition to being, I don't know, a basic administrative coordinator for Project Beta, just ticking boxes. These roles demand completely different mindsets.
Precisely. Now, factor in your psychological relationship to those roles. Employees often develop a high level of role identification with one specific role. Let's call it role 1. This leads to high personal engagement.
Meaning you really care about it, you're invested.
Yes, full cognitive, emotional, and physical presence in that preferred role.
So if role 1 is the innovative, high-impact project where I feel valued, but role 2 is, say, tedious budget entry, then role 1 feels much more attractive and fulfilling. It pulls me in.
Correct. The transition from the preferred role 1 to the less preferred role 2 is therefore perceived as psychologically draining and negatively valenced. Exiting the highly engaged role creates high inter-role conflict. It feels bad to leave the thing you like for the thing you don't.
That effort of resisting the pullback to the fun job sounds exhausting just thinking about it.
It absolutely is, and this is the critical connection to AR. Imagine you are forcing yourself to enact role 2, the boring budget coordinator, and suddenly you receive an urgent Slack message or email from the innovative role 1 team.
Ah, the interruption from the preferred role.
Exactly. Inter-role conflict explodes because you have a strong intrinsic motivational pullback toward that preferred task. To stay focused on role 2, the budget, you have to burn through limited self-regulation resources.
Well, self-regulation is like the finite mental battery I use to maintain control and resist distractions. My willpower fuel tank.
Yes, it's your capacity for mental control, and it depletes with use. That effort of self-control required to resist the preferred task and stay present in the non-preferred task is what consumes your capacity. And that directly results in attention residue concerning role 2, severely degrading your performance and accelerating your mental fatigue.
So I leave the current task feeling drained, not because the task itself was inherently hard, but because the effort of resisting the alternative task was enormous.
Precisely. The internal battle wears you out.
Okay, that framework helps us understand why we feel so messy and exhausted at the end of the day, even if we didn't do that much. But now we must elevate the stakes. In certain fields, this cognitive chaos isn't just about missing a deadline or feeling tired. It can be, well, catastrophic.
Absolutely. When attention fails in critical settings, the cost is measured in patient safety, airline crashes, massive infrastructure failures. We need to look closely at how task switching and AR merge to create error, especially in a high-pressure clinical environment like medicine.
Let's look at that specific example involving the doctor. This is where we see the immediate, tragic potential danger of fractured attention.
Right. Imagine a senior resident, let's call him Dr. Eris, working in a busy emergency department. He's late into a marathon 36-hour shift, so his cognitive load is already peaking due to sleep deprivation and high patient volume.
Already primed for errors.
Exactly. He is examining a 60-year-old man presenting with acute, severe flank pain, and he begins to run the standard, common protocol for kidney stones in his mind. He's defaulting to what's familiar and probable.
He's using that fast, automatic, type 1 thinking, relying on pattern recognition because it's efficient, especially when tired.
Precisely. Then a cascade of interruptions hits. His pager screens level 1 trauma alert, major car crash incoming. A second later, literally, a nurse needs him to sign 5 pages of discharge papers for a different patient, urgently. He spends maybe 90 critical seconds dealing with these 2 immediate, high-priority interruptions.
His focus is completely pulled away.
Completely. Shifting his attention entirely to the trauma protocol, thinking about airways, bleeding, and the administrative task.
When he returns to the patient with flank pain, the damage is done mentally, right?
Yes. The attention residue from the trauma alert, the mental fragments of checklists for hemorrhage control and rapid airway management is still active. It's clogging his working memory. When he restarts the diagnostic process for the flank pain patient, his fractured mind defaults to the easiest, most available conclusion: kidney stone.
Because that pattern was already activated before the interruptions?
Exactly. He orders the standard kidney stone CT scan, ignoring some subtle signs, maybe a slightly unusual vital sign, that should have prompted an immediate, broader investigation.
And he nearly missed a fatal diagnosis because of that cognitive default, triggered by the interruptions.
He nearly missed a leaking abdominal aortic aneurysm, which is often fatal within hours if not caught. The near catastrophe wasn't caused by clinical incompetence or lack of knowledge. It was a consequence of a system that maximized interruptions, fractured his attention, and pushed his overworked mind into a pattern recognition default state.
Wow. Was it caught?
Luckily, yes. In this case, a computerized diagnostic flag, a system designed to catch potential errors, prompted a reevaluation just before it was too late. But it highlights the danger.
That story is chilling because it shows how the mind, under duress and riddled with residue, seeks those dangerous shortcuts. This really underscores the need to understand the underlying cognitive biases that make these errors so ubiquitous, not just in medicine, but everywhere.
Absolutely. We must understand the brain's dual process thinking. As we touched on, we rely on 2 modes. Type 1 thinking is fast, intuitive, relies heavily on pattern recognition, and places a low cognitive burden on the user. It's what we use, estimates suggest, about 95% of the time.
It's our autopilot.
Right. And type 2 thinking is slow, methodical, involves critical appraisal and requires high cognitive strain. It's deliberate, effortful thinking.
So type 1 is the autopilot, and type 2 is the intense manual override we have to consciously engage.
Precisely. And cognitive errors and bias are overwhelmingly likely to occur during that dominant type 1 processing, especially when our capacity is strained by attention residue, fatigue, or information overload. The shortcuts type 1 relies on are called heuristics.
Mental shortcuts, rules of thumb.
Exactly. Cognitive rules of thumb designed to aid rapid decision-making. And crucially, these biases are universal. They do not correlate with intelligence. Smart people make these errors all the time. They're features of human cognition, not bugs related to intellect.
Okay, let's break down a few of the most common shortcuts or biases that lead to serious errors in these high-stakes fields. Maybe start with the most immediate one. What's freshest in our mind seems most important.
That is availability bias. This is the tendency to favor recent and easily recalled answers simply because they are, well, available at the forefront of your working memory. For example, if a clinician recently faced the personal trauma or stress of missing a pulmonary embolism.
A blood clot in the lung, very serious.
Very serious. They become acutely sensitive to that diagnosis afterward because the memory is so vivid and emotionally charged.
So the next patient who presents with maybe vague chest pain, even if they're statistically low risk based on age and history, is now viewed through the lens of that traumatic recent memory.
Exactly. The doctor might overestimate the probability and order excessive, potentially harmful or costly tests like CT scans for these low-risk patients because the memory of the missed embolism is overwhelmingly available, overriding the actual low statistical probability for the current patient.
Okay, availability bias, check. The next one, base rate neglect. Sounds like the most mathematically counterintuitive error. Like we're bad at statistics intuitively.
We are generally quite bad at intuitive statistics. Base rate neglect involves ignoring the true underlying incident rates or prevalence of a condition when interpreting test results. This is a really crucial concept, especially in diagnostics. Let's walk through an example slowly.
Okay, let's do it.
Imagine a rare, serious condition with a low prevalence, say. It affects only 3% of the population you're testing.
So 97 out of 100 people don't have it. Pretty rare.
Correct. Now, you use a sophisticated diagnostic test for this condition. Let's say your test is perfect at finding the disease. If it's there, 100% sensitive, it never misses a true case. But like almost all tests, it has a small failure rate in healthy people, say, a 5% false positive rate. It sometimes flags healthy people incorrectly.
Okay, 100% sensitive, 5% false positive rate. Got it.
Now, a positive result comes back for your patient. Your gut, your type 1 thinking, tells you they probably had the disease because the test is highly sensitive, it's good at finding it.
Yeah, positive tests sounds bad.
But the math, considering the low prevalence, tells a very different story. If you test 100 people from this population, 3 truly have the disease, and the test will correctly identify all 3 true positives. But 5 healthy people, that's 5% of the 97 healthy people, will also test falsely positive. False positives.
So you get 3 true positives and 5 false positives.
Exactly. So out of the 8 people who test positive in this group, only 3 actually have the disease. When you get a positive result back, the actual chance the patient has the condition is only 3 out of 8, which is 37.5%.
Wow, less than 40% chance, even with a positive test that seems really accurate.
Right. Ignoring that low base rate, that 3% prevalence, is a profound cognitive error. And it's often exacerbated by the pressure of the moment, the desire to act, and the difficulty of doing that math intuitively.
That's a powerful illustration of how pressure and inadequate attention, that residue, force us to rely on simple emotional conclusions. Positive test equals disease, rather than rigorous data interpretation.
Okay, what about the bias that makes us kind of lazy once we think we have an answer?
That is search satisfying. It's the tendency to stop investigating once the first plausible, satisfactory explanation is found. The brain is tired, or maybe just efficient. It found an answer, and it wants the task to be completed. Close the loop.
Give me an example.
Okay, a classic example is a patient presenting with acute shortness of breath. The clinician does an exam, maybe an x-ray, diagnoses, and starts treating obvious pneumonia. They found a clear cause.
Okay, makes sense. Treat the pneumonia.
But because they found the pneumonia, the mind finds satisfaction in that diagnosis and stops looking further. They might fail to search for and recognize a secondary, potentially more fatal comorbid condition like an early heart attack happening at the same time, or a small pulmonary embolism that was masked by the more obvious symptoms of pneumonia. So the search was satisfied, even if the investigation wasn't actually complete, and potentially dangerously incomplete.
Exactly. The first hit satisfied the search query, so the search terminates prematurely.
And finally, there's the bias, where we just sort of follow the established narrative, especially if someone senior set it up.
That's diagnostic momentum. This is the tendency to continue a clinical course of action or diagnosis, often one that was started by a more senior or respected clinician, or maybe just the previous team on shift, without undertaking a necessary, independent, critical reevaluation yourself.
So you inherit a label and just run with it.
Pretty much. You might fixate on a previously assigned label, say possible inflammatory disease, even if subsequent lab results or the patient's changing presentation starts to suggest something else entirely. The mental energy required to challenge the initial diagnosis, to interrupt that momentum, is simply too high, especially when fatigued or facing pressure. It's easier to go with the flow.
Okay, so we know our brains are flawed, prone to these biases, and desperately seek shortcuts when interrupted or fatigued by attention residue. Now let's pivot to the environment we inhabit most of the time, the digital one, because it feels increasingly deliberately designed to trigger these failure states, to actively hijack our already limited attention.
You are absolutely right to feel that way. The digital world is, in many ways, designed less for sustained human productivity and more for maximizing attention consumption. It's a constant battlefield of persuasive technology.
A battlefield. That sounds intense. Let's use the anecdote of Maya, the software developer, to illustrate how this plays out daily for so many knowledge workers.
Okay, so Maya needs an intense flow state, that deep, undisturbed concentration we talked about, to hunt for a complex, logic-defying bug hidden somewhere in potentially millions of lines of code. It requires sustained focus.
Yeah, you can't debug complex code while checking Instagram.
Definitely not. But her working environment actively prevents it. Her laptop, her primary tool, is a constantly flashing device connected to an octopus of communication tools: Slack, email, project management software, maybe Teams, social media.
Describe the daily onslaught she faces. What does that look like?
Well, she receives Slack notifications maybe every few minutes from marketing teams asking about a feature, project leads needing updates, colleagues asking for help across different time zones. She hears email chimes. Maybe she tried to turn them off, but the anxiety, the FOMO, keeps them on. Her project management tool flashes a tiny, persistent red dot demanding she update a task status.
Each of those little pings.
Yeah.
They're not just annoying, they're doing cognitive damage, based on what we've discussed.
Yes, precisely. Each of these pings is doing two things simultaneously. It's interrupting her current train of thought on the code, and it's demanding a tiny bit of processing power just to evaluate the notification. Each notification imposes extraneous cognitive load.
Extraneous cognitive load, like a constant tiny tax on her working memory.
Exactly. A minuscule siphon on her mental RAM. The cumulative effect across an 8-hour day is that Maya spends a huge portion of her time reacting to these external demands, rather than thinking deeply about the complex problems she's paid to solve. Her day is spent constantly answering the digital phone, so to speak.
And the irony is, these tools are often framed as enhancing collaboration or productivity.
Right, but in practice, they often actively degrade the core cognitive capacity needed for deep work, for reasoning, for problem solving. This leads to frustration, errors in the code, missed deadlines, and ultimately zero high-quality, focused output during those supposed work hours.
This intentional design, it's not accidental, is it? It's rooted in the economics of attention.
Fundamentally, we live in a world awash in information. As the technologist Kevin Kelly wisely observed years ago, the only factor becoming scarce in a world of abundance is human attention. Your attention, our collective attention, is the most valuable commodity now.
So the platforms need to grab it.
Therefore, the design goal of almost every platform, from social media to email clients to news sites, is singular. Capture and retain as much of that scarce resource as possible. Often, regardless of the cost to your focus, your well-being, or even your ability to do your primary job.
And the primary weapon they use to ensure we keep checking back, keep giving them that attention, is the dopamine loop, right?
Yes, they expertly exploit our brain's deep, primitive craving for novelty and reward by cleverly hijacking our dopamine pathways. That notification, that buzz in your pocket, that red dot, that little number counting up on an icon, it acts as an intermittent and variable reward.
Ah, the slot machine mechanism. I don't know when the jackpot, the valuable piece of information, the social approval like a like or a comment or the critical email I'm waiting for will come, but I know it might come with the next check, so I keep pulling that digital lever, keep refreshing.
It's behavioral conditioning 101 in its purest form, deployed at massive scale. The intermittent uncertainty, the variability of the reward, ensures you are checking constantly, compulsively. This pulls your attention away from any deep focus, contributes directly to chronic mental fatigue, and establishes an almost addictive pattern of consumption. You are literally being trained, rewarded for distraction.
And this connects directly into the emotional network, the social brain, that keeps us tethered even when we know, logically, we should disconnect.
Absolutely. That emotional network is often crystallized in FOMO, the fear of missing out. The entire ecosystem is often engineered to trigger the brain's alerting network and emotional centers, linking those notifications directly to deep psychological needs. Social appreciation, acceptance, belonging, status, self-image.
So if I step away, if I turn off notifications, the anxiety kicks in. It tells me I might miss not only a critical piece of work information, but potentially a social moment, an inside joke, a piece of gossip, something that defines my status or acceptance within my social or professional group.
Exactly. That anxiety, deliberately cultivated or not, reinforces the user's perceived need to be always on. You become trapped in a reactive loop dictated largely by platform design, which is often optimized primarily for one thing: maximizing your time spent scrolling, checking, engaging, and responding. You effectively lose agency over your own focus because you are constantly fighting a system designed by thousands of very smart engineers to keep you hooked.
Okay, so we've established that multitasking is largely an illusion. Attention residue is a profound cognitive cost that makes us less effective and more stressed, and the digital environment is often intentionally rigged against our ability to focus. Sounds a bit bleak.
It can feel that way, but the good news is that this knowledge itself gives us agency. Understanding the mechanisms is the first step to fighting back. We can develop concrete, evidence-based strategies for reclaiming our attention and cognitive control.
All right, let's talk solutions. Where do we start? How do we push back against the residue and the distractions?
The battle really begins with proactive boundaries and intentional mental organization. We need to start with structured workflow strategies that acknowledge our brain's fundamental need for proper closure on tasks.
Okay, closure. How do we achieve that sense of closure when tasks, especially knowledge work tasks, often feel inherently endless? There's always more research to do, more polishing.
That's a key point. We need to shift our focus. We must focus on time blocks over subjective completion. Methods like the Pomodoro technique, for instance, don't just segment work arbitrarily. They force you to define a specific time window, say 25 minutes or 50 minutes. When that timer goes off, you must accept that the allocated time for that session has ended, regardless of the task's state of doneness.
So the timer dictates closure, not my feeling of whether it's finished.
Exactly. This ritual helps you find closure for that work block, rather than chasing the often unattainable subjective feeling of completion. You train your brain to accept the transition.
So even if the email is perfectly polished or the spreadsheet doesn't quite balance yet, I stop when the timer rings. That ritual signals to the brain that this task is officially paused or over for now, which is the key to breaking the residue cycle from carrying over into the next thing.
That ritualized transition is vital. And to transition effectively without carrying that mental baggage, you need the second strategy, the ready-to-resume plan. You must dedicate a specific, structured time, even just 60 seconds, between tasks specifically for mental cleanup and preparation for re-entry.
Okay, a mental palate cleanser. What does that cleanup look like in practice?
It involves doing what some people call status dumps. Before you close the laptop, switch projects, or move to the next meeting, take a moment to jot down 2 key things. First, where exactly you left off, be specific. Second, what is the single most important next step you plan to take when you return to this task? Write it down immediately.
So I'm essentially externalizing the thought, getting the lingering ideas, the what's next, out of my head and onto an external trusted system like a notebook or a digital note.
Precisely. This concrete externalization helps your brain empty the attention residue related to the first task. You are acknowledging the ongoing nature of the work, but you have created a reliable external memory, guaranteeing your future self will know exactly where to start. This allows you to be truly present for the second task without the old one consuming your precious working memory, your RAM.
That makes sense. Externalize the residue. Okay, and finally, in terms of structure, managing our physical context seems really important, but also tricky, especially now with so much remote and hybrid work blurring the lines.
It's incredibly important. We must intentionally seek out, define, and protect the third space. This refers to an intentional, separate physical location. It could be a specific coffee shop, a library, a quiet corner of a park, maybe a co-working space that is psychologically distinct and free from the pressures and triggers of both the home environment and the digital, always-on office environment.
Why is that physical separation, that third space, so crucial for focus?
Because it offers you near complete control over your context and transitions. At your home office desk, interruptions are often forced upon you. Maybe a child needs something, a delivery arrives, you see chores that need doing, a neighbor stops by. In the third space, you choose the moment to engage or disengage. You control the boundaries much more effectively.
So that separation minimizes the forced switches that create the most intense attention residue and helps create a sense of balance and tranquility needed for deep work.
Exactly. It allows for more intentional context switching, which is far less taxing.
Okay, so we have proactive boundaries, time blocks, ready to resume plans, third spaces. Now let's move from setting up the environment to actively training our minds. How can we mitigate those dangerous cognitive biases we discussed earlier, like the ones that almost led to disaster for Dr. Harris?
This area is often called cognitive debiasing. And perhaps the most powerful, consistently supported intervention we have is surprisingly simple, though not always easy to implement. Slowing down.
Just slow down.
Essentially, yes. Since we know cognitive error is primarily driven by that fast, intuitive, pattern-matching type 1 thinking, especially under pressure, we must consciously force a transition to the slower, more deliberate type 2 critical thinking.
How does that look practically in a fast-paced environment? Do I just stare into space for a minute longer before deciding?
It's about the intentional insertion of a reflective pause. It doesn't have to be long. Clinical trials have shown that forced, slow deliberation, literally just taking an extra 30 seconds to review the data again before ordering a complex test or committing to a critical diagnosis, successfully mitigates things like availability bias and measurably improves diagnostic accuracy.
So that pause gives type 2 thinking a chance to catch up and override the potentially flawed initial impulse from type 1.
Precisely. You're creating space for critical appraisal.
Okay, so slowing down is key. Coupled with that, we probably need to inject some healthy skepticism into our own thought process, right? Question ourselves.
Absolutely. You must practice metacognition. This is essentially thinking about your own thinking, having awareness and insight into your own thought process as it's happening. The key tool here is active self-challenging.
How do you do that?
You force yourself to play the internal devil's advocate. Consciously ask yourself questions like, what else could this be? What is the alternative explanation or diagnosis I might be ignoring here? What assumptions am I making? This conscious consideration of alternatives helps mitigate biases like the anchoring effect, where you might get stuck on the first piece of information you received, or overconfidence bias.
Be your own internal reviewer.
Okay.
And finally, for really complex or high-stakes environments, there's the power of external structures like checklists.
Yes, checklists are classic cognitive forcing tools. They're not just reminders. They fundamentally challenge the structure of thought itself. They demand that the user proceed in an ordered, predefined, and complete fashion, rather than relying on potentially flawed intuitive shortcuts or imperfect memory, especially when under stress or fatigue.
They externalize the correct process.
Exactly. And the evidence is strong. Studies consistently show that checklists significantly improve diagnostic accuracy, reduce surgical complications, enhance performance in complex layered tasks like interpreting ECGs. They act as an external scaffold for cognition, ensuring critical steps aren't missed when working memory is overloaded or attention is fragmented. They externalize the organization that your brain sometimes cannot sustain under pressure.
That brings us back to those really high-stakes fields like aerospace or flight control, where they seem to treat attention not just as a desirable soft skill, but as a professional, quantifiable, trainable capacity, like a muscle.
They absolutely do. They view attention as a critical resource that must be actively trained, managed, and protected using rigorous neurocognitive interventions and system design. Think of flight control teams at NASA or in aviation during a complex launch simulation or an in-flight emergency. When a serious anomaly appears, the stress would naturally cause tunnel vision and likely massive attention residue from dealing with the initial failure or alert.
So what does a professional, organizationally enforced attention management protocol look like in that kind of setting? How do they manage the residue?
It typically involves multiple layers working together. First, they often enforce mandatory cognitive reset protocols after any major alert or critical event. This isn't just telling people to take a deep breath. It's often a structured, brief protocol, maybe 2 minutes long, where the crew stops talking about the previous failure, they explicitly confirm the current state of the overall system, and they verbally commit to a specific, agreed-upon future course of action before they can resume normal communication or procedures.
So it's like a formalized, team-based status dump done under duress to clear the air and refocus everyone. They are actively managing the psychological residue of the alert itself.
Exactly. They acknowledge it and process it explicitly. They also utilize advanced ergonomic design in their interfaces. These displays are often meticulously designed to minimize extraneous cognitive load. For instance, they might only show the 3 most critical variables for any given phase of flight or operation, hiding less relevant data to prevent information overload that would inevitably clog working memory and increase error rates.
So they design the environment to protect attention.
Precisely. The goal in these fields is to move beyond simply telling people try to focus harder, which we know often doesn't work under pressure, to actively training the brain and designing the systems to help manage its inherently limited cognitive capacity through structure, process, and thoughtful design.
That completely reframes focus for me.
Yeah.
It's not just about individual willpower. It's about systematic design, structured processes, and specific training.
Yes. And that idea of systematic management leads us to the final and perhaps most countercultural and challenging strategy for reclaiming cognitive control in our digitally saturated, always-on lives, appreciating the value of doing nothing.
Doing nothing. That feels almost like a radical political act in a rise and grind culture that equates busyness with worth.
It really does. We seem to have developed a deep societal discomfort with unoccupied moments, with just being alone with our thoughts. You might recall that famous, slightly disturbing study where people actually preferred giving themselves mild electric shocks rather than sitting quietly alone with their thoughts for just 15 minutes.
Yeah, I remember that. We've conditioned ourselves to fear downtime, to immediately reach for a distraction, but you're saying those moments are actually vital for cognitive function.
They are absolutely essential. When we constantly fill every gap with podcasts, social media, emails, or even just anxious rumination, what essential cognitive work are we interrupting? We are interrupting the activation of the default mode network, DMN.
The default mode network. Okay, what does that do?
The DMN is the brain's essential background processor. It's a network of brain regions that becomes most active during moments of quiet, non-goal-oriented activity when you are not actively engaged in an external task demanding focus. Think daydreaming, mind-wandering, reflecting.
And what's happening during that DMN activity?
Crucial stuff. The DMN is vital for consolidating memories, moving things from short-term to long-term storage. It's where we engage in reflection, make sense of recent experiences, connect disparate ideas, plan for the future, and even process social and emotional information. It's like the brain's essential maintenance and integration cycle.
So if I never give my brain that unstructured downtime, if I'm always on and focused on the next external thing, I am constantly interrupting the essential long-term maintenance and processing work that actually makes me a coherent thinker, allows me to learn, and helps me regulate my emotions.
Absolutely. Staring out the window, taking a quiet walk without headphones, just letting your mind drift far from being wasted time. This is actually a necessary, productive activity. It supports deeper cognitive function. It allows your brain to process the day's events and consolidate learning. And it helps replenish the very mental control capacity, that self-regulation fuel tank that the attention economy constantly seeks to deplete.
So embracing doing nothing is actually key to moving beyond the constant reactionary cycle and asserting real control over your mental landscape.
It's fundamental. It allows you to shift from being passively managed by external stimuli to actively managing your internal state.
This has been an incredibly thorough deep dive. Thank you. The core realization for me is that the messy feeling, that constant exhaustion from trying to juggle everything, it's not just a feeling or a personal failure. It is a real measurable cognitive cost called attention residue. And it's being actively exploited, intentionally or not, by our modern digital environment.
That sums it up well. And importantly, we've seen there are clear evidence-based strategies we can use, from structuring our workflows with time blocks and using those ready-to-resume plans, to employing cognitive debiasing techniques like consciously slowing down and practicing metacognition, asking what else could this be? These are the tools we need to assert agency over our mental state.
Reclaiming focus, then, it isn't really about finding the perfect new productivity app or just trying harder. It's a much deeper assertion of control over your attention, which truly is your most vital and limited resource in this information age.
It's about regaining cognitive sovereignty.
Right. And by intentionally structuring our time, managing that mental clutter through techniques like status dumps, protecting our focus spaces, and practicing these cognitive strategies, you can actually trade the illusion of frantic, constant productivity for the reality of clearer thinking, better recall, deeper work, and ultimately a calmer, more focused mind.